Ready for takeoff. Today, we're going deep on the Wright brothers.
The bicycle mechanics.
Yeah, those guys, the ones who took to the skies. We've got a great podcast episode and some historical accounts to dive into.
It really paints a picture of their journey.
From gliders to becoming aviation pioneers.
What I find so interesting is that their story didn't happen in a vacuum. There were tons of other people all over the world trying to fly at the same time.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't just them tinkering away in Ohio.
Exactly. It was a real race to get into the air.
A global competition.
Right. And one of the guys they were up against was Samuel Langley.
Big name in science back then.
Huge. He was even funded by the Smithsonian.
Wow.
But he was making headlines for the wrong reasons.
His attempts at flight weren't exactly going smoothly.
Not at all. I mean, his pilot almost died during one launch.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine that pressure?
I can't even imagine.
All while the newspapers are watching your every move.
Talk about a PR nightmare.
Totally. It makes you wonder if that's why the Wrights were so secretive.
Yeah, maybe they saw what happened to Langley and thought, we're doing this differently.
It's interesting to think about whether that secrecy helped them or hurt them.
Because while they were working quietly, others were already doing public flights.
People like Alberto Santos Dumont and Henri Farman.
And they were getting a lot of attention. I guess we'll find out if the Wrights made the right choice as we go along. But first, let's go back to 1903. They were working on a new glider.
But they needed more than wind this time.
This time they needed an engine.
And not just any engine.
It had to be powerful enough to lift the glider.
But also light enough so it wouldn't be too heavy.
That seems like a pretty tall order back then.
Oh, yeah. This was before we had all those lightweight, powerful engines we have today.
I guess so. So did they find what they were looking for?
Well, they tried a bunch of automobile manufacturers. No dice.
Really?
Nobody could build what they needed.
Sounds like they were asking for the impossible. So what did they do?
They turned to their mechanic, Charlie Taylor.
Oh, I've heard of him.
He wasn't exactly Mr. Popular.
Why not?
Well, Catherine Wright, their sister, didn't seem to like him much.
Oh, interesting. So what did he do that made him so unlikable?
Well, it wasn't really anything he did. He was just, insufferable, according to Catherine.
Insufferable, huh?
Yeah, but insufferable or not, he was a talented mechanic.
That's what matters, I guess. So did he manage to build the engine for them?
He did. He built them a custom engine, just what they needed.
So he did what all those big car companies couldn't.
He sure did.
Wow, pretty impressive.
It really was. You got to remember, this is a time when engineering was booming.
Right, they weren't just building something, they were kind of inventing it.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, they weren't the only ones trying to fly. But what about the propellers?
Oh, yeah, those were a huge problem, too.
Why?
Because they couldn't just use propellers meant for boats.
I see.
So they had to come up with something totally new.
And how did that go?
Well, it led to a lot of arguments between the brothers. Catherine even threatened to leave home if they didn't stop bickering.
Sounds like a stressful time.
Yeah, it was.
But they eventually figured it out, right?
They did. But it was during those arguments that they had this breakthrough.
What was it?
They realized that if they built the propellers out of spruce wood
Spruce wood.
and they designed them to spin in opposite directions.
Oh. Wait, what?
Yeah, opposite directions.
So like one clockwise and one counterclockwise.
Exactly.
I don't get it. How does that help?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain, but basically each propeller creates this like mini tornado.
A mini tornado of air.
Yeah, so if you have them spinning in opposite directions, those little tornadoes reinforce each other,
Okay.
and that creates more lift.
Wow, who would have thought of that?
It's pretty ingenious.
And do they still use that today?
Yeah, it's still used in aviation today.
So after all that work, they finally had their machine ready to go.
Ready for its first real test.
And that brings us to December 17th, 1903.
Cold morning.
Kitty Hawk, North Carolina.
Just a handful of people there to watch.
Some lifeguards even helped carry the flyer.
Oh, yeah. And there was a young guy named John T. Daniel.
What about him?
He just happened to be there that day.
Yeah.
And he ended up being the photographer who captured that historical moment.
Wow. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
I know, right?
So after all that build-up, tell me, what was it like?
12 seconds.
12 seconds.
That's all it was.
That's it.
12 seconds and 120 feet.
Doesn't seem like much now.
It might not, but back then it was a huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first controlled, powered flight in history.
Exactly.
Amazing. So what did they do next? Did they shout it from the rooftops?
Actually, no.
They do.
They sent that famous telegram to their father.
The one everyone knows about.
Yeah, but they didn't really tell anyone else.
Really?
They didn't really send any photos or anything like that.
Come on.
Well, they knew the world was watching,
And they didn't want anyone to steal their ideas.
Exactly. They were really worried about that.
So even after this amazing accomplishment, they still stayed secretive.
Yeah, that secrecy was really important to them.
But as we'll see, that decision would create some new challenges, as they went from just inventors
To businessmen.
they had flown.
But their journey was far from over.
So last time we talked about that first flight, a pretty amazing feat.
Yeah, huge accomplishment.
But they weren't just inventors, they were also pretty smart businessmen.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And they knew they needed to protect their invention.
Especially something as groundbreaking as that.
Which brings us back to all that secrecy.
Right, they really kept things under wraps.
So how did that strategy work out for them?
What's interesting, when you compare them to some of the other aviation pioneers,
Like Santos Dumont?
yeah, he was practically a celebrity.
Especially in Europe.
Huge over there.
But the Wrights, they were still practically unknown?
It's almost like they were playing a whole different game.
Why do you think that was? Were they just paranoid, or is there something else going on?
Well, remember, patent laws weren't as developed back then.
So they were just trying to protect themselves.
Exactly. They didn't want to give away too much before they had a patent.
Makes sense, but did all that secrecy end up hurting them in the long run?
It definitely played a role in all those flyers or liars rumors.
The ones going around Europe?
Yep, people were skeptical because they weren't seeing any proof.
While others were out there flying in public.
Exactly. Then those guys were getting all the attention.
It's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy.
The brilliant inventors hidden away.
Battling against all that disbelief. So how did they finally overcome all that skepticism?
Well, eventually, they did give in and do a public demonstration.
I bet that wasn't an easy decision.
Not at all. There were a lot of factors at play.
Like what?
Well, there was pressure from potential buyers.
People who wanted to invest in their invention.
Yeah, they needed to see it to believe it.
And their patent was finally approved in 1906.
That was a big turning point.
And then there was that offer from the U.S. War Department.
That's right. The military was starting to take notice.
You'd think they'd be all over this new technology.
Well, they were cautious.
Understandably so. I mean, the idea of flying was still pretty radical back then.
Right. A lot of people thought it was impossible.
Including people in the military.
Yeah, there were definitely some doubters.
So the War Department wanted proof.
They said, show us what you got.
It was a make-or-break moment. So what did they do?
They agreed to the demonstration.
But I bet they weren't ready to give away all their secrets just yet.
Oh, no, they made sure they had a contract first.
Smart move.
And they chose Kitty Hawk for the test.
Ah, going back to where it all began.
They were comfortable there, in control.
And they were taking a big risk.
Huge, both financially and for their reputation.
But this demonstration was different from that first flight in 1903.
Oh, yeah, this time they unveiled a modified flyer.
What was different about it?
Well, for one, it had upright seats.
Upright seats.
Yeah, for the pilot and a passenger.
So they weren't just lying down anymore.
Exactly, it was a huge step forward.
I guess it showed that they were thinking about more than just experiments.
They were thinking about the future of flight.
A future where anyone could fly.
That's right.
Pretty visionary. So how did the demonstration go? Did they finally win over the skeptics?
Well, on May 6, 1908, Wilbur took to the skies.
Yeah.
He had a passenger with him, a local lifeguard.
So it was the first two-person flight,
Exactly, and they had pictures to prove it.
which were all over the news.
The whole world got to see the Wright flyer in action.
I bet that was an amazing sight.
It definitely turned the tide in their favor.
They secured that War Department contract,
They did,
but their journey wasn't over yet.
not by a long shot.
They still had to prove themselves to Europe.
Especially in France, they were really skeptical.
Off to Europe they went then.
Another adventure.
They run into more trouble.
Well, their European adventure was anything but smooth sailing.
Uh-oh. What happened?
Well, while Wilbur was celebrating in America, he had to head back to Europe pretty quickly.
Why?
To fulfill a contract with a French company,
Ah.
they had left their Flyer 3 in storage near Paris.
Yeah.
And when they got there, it was a disaster.
What do you mean?
The flyer was damaged,
Damaged? How?
parts were missing, wings were torn, the radiator was smashed.
Oh, no. What a nightmare.
It was a huge setback.
Did they ever figure out what happened?
It's still a bit of a mystery. Some people even suspected sabotage.
He sabotaged.
Yeah, it's a pretty tense time.
So they were up against more than just technical challenges.
Right, it was almost like someone was trying to stop them.
So what did they do? Did they just give up?
Not a chance. They were too determined.
Good for them.
They found a new ally in France,
Who is that?
Leon Belay, a French automobile manufacturer.
So another car guy.
Yeah, but Belay was different. He recognized the importance of what the Wrights were doing.
He saw their vision.
Exactly. So he offered them his help.
What kind of help?
He gave them a workshop to repair the flyer.
Wow, that was generous.
And he even offered the help of his factory workers.
So even in France, they found people who believed in them.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that there are always people who are willing to help if you're passionate enough about something.
But they were still facing an uphill battle.
Especially with the French press breathing down their necks.
Those guys were ruthless.
They had already labeled Wilbur a fraud.
A bluffer, wasn't it?
That's the one.
So the pressure was on.
Big time. They had to deliver not just for themselves, but for America.
The weight of the world on their shoulders.
And then, just when they thought they were back on track,
Yeah.
disaster struck again.
What happened? Did they crash?
Not a crash this time, but still a serious accident.
Oh no, what was it?
During an engine test, a radiator hose burst,
Oh, wow.
and it sprayed Wilbur with boiling water.
Oh no, is he okay?
He survived, but he had pretty bad burns on his arm and chest.
Ouch, that sounds painful.
It was, and it put the whole demonstration in jeopardy.
How could he fly in that condition?
It was a tough situation. They had a damaged flyer, skeptical crowds, a hostile press.
And now an injured pilot.
But Wilbur was tough.
He wasn't giving up,
No way. He was determined to fly.
even if it killed him.
Well, not quite, but he was pushing through a lot of pain.
Talk about dedication. So what happened?
They moved the repaired flyer to a racetrack outside of Le Mans.
Why?
They wanted to avoid all the attention.
Ah, so it was a secret mission.
Under the cover of night.
Sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It was a high-stakes operation for sure.
They were risking everything on this one demonstration. So what was it like that day?
August 8th, 1908.
Yeah.
Big crowd, including all those skeptical journalists.
The ones who called him a fraud.
The tension was thick.
So after all that buildup, all those setbacks, what happened?
Wilbur took off.
He did it.
The Flyer 3. He flew flawlessly.
Amazing.
Graceful turns, even figure eights.
Wow, he really showed them.
Everyone was stunned.
I can imagine.
Even Louis Blériot.
The famous French aviator.
Yeah, he even admitted that a new era of flight had begun.
What a victory.
Wilbur had silenced his doubters.
And he had captivated the world. But was it over? Was their journey finally complete?
Well, not quite.
Remember, Orville was back in America.
Getting ready for his own demonstration for the War Department.
Right, I'd almost forgotten about that.
And, as we'll see in the final part of our deep dive, that demonstration would take a pretty dramatic turn.
Last time we left off with Wilbur, he was a hero in Europe.
Finally proving that the Wright Flyer was the real deal.
But back in America, Orville was getting ready for his own big test for the War Department.
Right, they still needed convincing.
You'd think after Wilbur's success, they'd be on board.
Well, there was still this sense of seeing is believing.
I guess they wanted to see it for themselves.
On American soil.
Plus, there was that contract.
A lot of money on the line.
So the pressure was still on Orville.
Absolutely.
Where did he choose to do this demonstration?
Fort Myer.
Fort Myer.
In Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Wow. Talk about symbolism.
They were trying to win over the U.S. military.
The heart of American power.
Convince them that flight was the future of warfare.
So how did it go? Was it another triumph for the Wrights?
Well, it started out well enough.
Okay.
September 3rd, 1908. Orville took off with Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge.
A military officer?
Yeah, he was the first one to ever fly in an airplane.
Wow, can you imagine being that guy?
Putting your life in the hands of these two bicycle mechanics.
Must have been terrifying.
And exhilarating.
But it didn't end well, did it?
No, it didn't. The flight went fine for the first few minutes. Then a propeller blade shattered.
Oh, no.
The flyer lost control and crashed.
It's easy to forget how dangerous those early flights were.
Yeah, they were pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
And sometimes things went wrong. What happened to Orville and Lieutenant Selfridge?
It was a bad crash.
Yeah?
Orville survived, but he was badly injured.
Then the Selfridge?
He died from his injuries.
He was the first airplane crash fatality, wasn't he? Yeah.
It was.
What a tragedy. I mean, after all those triumphs, after proving everyone wrong.
And then this.
It must have been devastating. Did they ever fly again after that?
You know, it would have been understandable if they had given up.
They had been through so much.
Skepticism, setbacks, now this.
But they didn't, did they?
No, the Wright brothers were not quitters.
So what happened?
Orville, after a long recovery, he started flying again the next year.
Really?
He wanted to honor Selfridge's memory.
By proving that flight was the future.
Exactly.
Wow, that's incredible. So they kept flying But what else did they do?
They kept innovating,
Making their planes better,
safer, more reliable,
and they kept fighting for their patents.
navigating all those business deals and legal battles.
So it was more than just about flying at this point.
It was about shaping the future of aviation.
Building a lasting legacy.
Exactly.
But I bet it wasn't easy.
Oh no, they faced lawsuits, skeptical investors, accusations of fraud.
Sounds like a lot to deal with.
It was, but they never gave up on their vision.
And in the end, they succeeded.
They changed the world.
Their story is truly inspiring.
It's a reminder that anything is possible.
If you have the passion and the dedication.
The Wright brothers, they dared to dream of flight.
And they made it a reality. So next time you see a plane flying overhead,
Take a moment to remember them.
their journey was full of challenges.
Setbacks, even tragedy.
But their unwavering belief,
Their persistence.
their commitment to pushing the boundaries,
Changed the world forever.
their story is timeless.
A reminder that we can achieve anything.
If we never give up on our dreams. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Wright brothers.
Until next time.
Keep looking up.